So I left the mics on.
Okay. So they're all on. They just need to be picked up and still connected.
And we have, I think, we have about a minute already before we go live.
Yeah.
Live stream's good. She's on now.
Okay, great. Okay, ready to get started when you are? Can we raise this a bit so I don't have to lean over? Okay, good. Yeah, okay, good. Okay, is everyone with us? Okay, hi, welcome. I'm Paul Lucier. I teach science communications with impact here at Yale, both in Yale College and over at Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. What we do in our classes is we study, develop, and pilot communication architectures to help build a foundation of trust towards sustainability outcomes. And we learn a lot of things in that process, other than that being a mouthful. We learn, of course, that that's very, very hard to do and easier said than done. And when you couple that, particularly with the global environmental challenges before us, which require an unprecedented amount of trust across sectors in order to facilitate the level of collaboration that the sustainability transformation that is incumbent upon us to meet that challenge, it becomes particularly difficult. Trust is really one of those things that when you really get down to it, it's more of a feeling than anything else. It's something that we sort of accept as the fabric of our being. Every time we cross the street, every time you get a haircut, every time you turn on the tap, every time you sit down for a meal, you essentially are engaging in a kind of relationship, of trust. And you don't really think about it until it's not there anymore, until you cross the street and suddenly the same street that you've crossed for several decades, there's a little old lady who comes around the corner and hits you, or suddenly there's no water, from the tap, or you're getting an unusually bad haircut, and suddenly you begin to ask yourself, what's wrong? It is the absence of trust by which we often come to terms with trust. And when you add to that with the global environmental challenges before us, where we are actually partners in that erosion of trust. When you turn on the tap water and that tap water is there, prior to this era of transcendent awareness, the tap water not being there was basically someone else's fault, the water engineer's fault. Now, of course, there's the possibility of the science connecting that result, that outcome, to the fact that there just maybe not enough water to go around, and maybe you're hosing down your lawn every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, is ultimately a partner, in that outcome. This creates a whole other level of confusion, and anxiety, because you begin to question ourselves. Do we trust ourselves to, in fact, contribute to a sustainable future? Do we have it in ourselves? The values that we have learned, the values that we have been weaned on, the identities by which we shape ourselves, really have become accomplices in the levels of devastation, destruction, and the challenges before us. So what we're doing here today is we've assembled a distinguished panel basically to help us all tackle and come to terms with the currency, that is trust. Each of our panelists here, they basically carry the that is the monkey that they carry on their backs. With Edelman, we do it's essentially is trust in communications, and trust to our companies that we represent and that we work with, and helping move them towards sustainability. Do they say what they mean? Do they mean what they say? And do we say what we mean? And do we mean what we say in representing them? Likewise with Patagonia, Vince Stanley, do our products really and truly reflect our values? Jonathan Lin, does the science ultimately that must needs undergird the sustainability transformation that we are obligated to move towards? Does the science ultimately back this up? Is the science trustworthy? How do we engage in relationships of trust that allow us to further the science and see the application and implementation of the science towards solutions? And finally, with Jason, of course, how do we begin to measure that trust? How do we have reliance and reliability, and how do we find credibility in our environmental performance indexes upon which many of our sustainable outcomes will be planned, built, and propagated? So without further ado, I just want to introduce very quickly, our guest, Gail Becker. To my right is the President of Strategic Partnerships and Global Integration for Edelman. Gail identifies and advances strategic alliances and partnerships globally and oversees the execution and integration of those business relationships across the entire Edelman network. She also sits on the board for United Entertainment Group, DJE Company, and is the founding chair of Edelman's Global Women's Executive Network. Throughout her tenure with Edelman, Gail has served as strategic counsel on a broad range of clients, including Warner Brothers, Starbucks, Microsoft, Norton, Activision, MPAA, and the Recording Academy, otherwise known as the Grammys. Gail has also served as Director of Communications for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services under Donna Shalala during the first Clinton administration. Also recently, Gail directed a short documentary film, which has been recognized by a number of international film festivals. A Journey with Purpose follows her 9-year-old son's trip back to Auschwitz with his grandfather, who was a prisoner there for 4 years. She's a wonderful soul, and I'm happy to have her here with us. Carol Cohn is the chair of social practice and business at Edelman, and as such has responsibility for Edelman's sustainability and citizenship offerings worldwide. She provides strategic counsel to clients including ADT, the Girl Scouts, Southwest Airlines, Exelis, Wrigley, and PNC. She has a deep commitment to innovate research, conducting more than 24 studies throughout her career. Cohn is also a requested expert around the globe on CSR, cause branding, and corporate citizenship. A few years back, PR Week, ladies and gentlemen, called her, and I quote, arguably the most powerful and visible figure in the world of cause branding. As far as I'm concerned, they could have stopped at the first part of the sentence and been just as correct. Vince Stanley has been with Patagonia since 1973. He is Patagonia's Director of Philosophy. As such, Vincent has helped develop its Responsible Economy campaign, the Footprint Chronicles, the company's interactive website that outlines the social and environmental impact of its products, the Common Threads Partnership, and Patagonia Books. He's also a poet whose work has appeared in Best American Poetry. Jason Schwartz is the program manager of the Environmental Performance Index here at FES, where he coordinates research, communications, and global partnerships. Previously, he's worked as a journalist and media strategist with Greenpeace USA. I also asked him if I could add that he was a good cook, and he says, well, we may as well throw in that I'm also a good stunt driver. So, for the record, he's a good stunt driver. Pro bono, good stunt driver. And lastly, our moderator, Marissa, if you'd like to come down. Are you going to moderate from here, or are you going to moderate from there?
No, I'm going to moderate
Yeah, come on down. So I'm going to turn. Marissa is a third-year joint MBA and Master of Environmental Management student here at Yale. Last year, she organized the colloquium on sustainable marketing, bringing in marketing leaders from a broad range of companies who are incorporating sustainability into their marketing programs in innovative ways. After graduation, she'll be going on to managing partnership marketing for ChargePoint, the largest electric vehicle charging network in the world. So, thank you all. Marissa, you're on your own.
Well, actually, okay,
What?
great.
What?
Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to our esteemed panelists. We're actually going to get started with a presentation from Gail about the Edelman Trust Barometer.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having us here today. Great. So this is the 15th year that we've done our trust barometer, something that we've measured trust around the world globally. And the images that you see there are quite significant because it really points to some of the context that we've all experienced this year and previously unimaginable context. So the conflict in the Ukraine, the Sony Pictures hack, the disappearance of airline jets, some corporate reputational issues with Uber, and the spread of Ebola, just to name a few. This gives you a little bit of our methodology. We surveyed 33 respondents in 27 countries. We surveyed both general population per market as well as informed public. And those informed public, and you'll see a little icon in the corner, those represent higher income groups with significant media consumption and higher education. In general, interestingly enough, we find that the general population is about 10 points more skeptical than the informed publics. Okay, so you saw a little bit of some of those pictures. Again, we called it the year of the unpredictable and unimaginable, and this really had an important effect on trust. And here's where we start to see some of that. So trust in 3 of the 4 institutions that we look at globally fell this year. The lowest trust since 2008, but the rank order remains the same. Now, government, as you can see, was the only one to rise, which may seem surprising, but largely that's because it has always been the lowest. And it really couldn't fall much further. But that's also related to significant rises in trust in countries like Russia, Indonesia, and India. So basically what this tells us is that across the board, trust has evaporated. And what we have seen in 2015 is really the beginning of the era of skepticism. So here's where you get to see how do people feel about trust when they get up in the morning. Now, this is the informed publics, okay? So just keep that in mind. And this is what we call the trust index. And basically it takes the average score across the 4 institutions in each of the 27 markets. And this average, again, really speaks to people's core belief about trust. And here's where we start to see significant effect on trust. You see a rise in the number of the red or the distrusters. You see a shrinking in the gray or the uncertains, and a decrease in the number of the blue or most trusting markets. Now this is the same chart, but for the general population. And among the general population, you see 2/3 fall into that red distruster category, which again reverts back to the same levels of trust that we saw in 2008, despite the fact that the economic conditions in many of these countries have gotten significantly better. This year, the drop, however, is not related to the economy, but rather it's due to a loss of confidence in institutions. Okay, hopefully you can all see this. Can you see that in the back of the room? Okay, good. So this is looking at trust in NGOs. Now, trust in NGOs have had a 15-year ascent. Trust in NGOs have really increased for the past 15 years. This year, however, we see that 19 out of 27 markets have less trust in NGOs than last year, confirming that what was once a former rise is now under scrutiny. In 2015, what we started to see is some cracks in NGOs' reputation throughout Western Europe, as well as Asia. This is the first time that we actually see a drop of trust in NGOs in China. And perhaps that's due to the belief that they should be doing more about the environment. Interestingly enough, you can see also a decrease in trust in the UK, which is probably about fracking and a disappointment with government. So, trust in media. This is a sad story for trust in media, with nearly 2/3 of the markets distrusting media. Now, some have seen minimal increases, as you can see, but those are offset by some pretty large declines. And I encourage you to take a look at Hong Kong, for instance, which perhaps begs the question, should the government have done more? Should the media have done more in terms of being more an active support of the protesters? Unsurprisingly, particularly as we've been doing this for many years, there is a higher level of trust in media in authoritarian countries. Let's take a deeper look at trust in government. So government is the one area where we've seen trust stabilize, but really at very low levels. And it's flat, actually, with the exception of a significant jump in Russia and Indonesia, two of which, by the way, had significant elections this year. Take a look at South Korea. South Korea is a significant drop, which could be contextualized through what happened with the ferry incident and a question about how quickly government responded or the regulatory body created accountability. Same is true for Malaysia. Look at Malaysia. There was much scandal around the missing airlines and the role of government. Now, China is interesting because China already at 76 with not much movement in the past year. It's always had an extraordinary high trust in government. But this year, you see, we think the 6-point gain could be due to the premier's anti-corruption work and the pledging to clean up the government. Again, you sort of can't look at the slide without calling out Russia, which has an interesting 20-point jump driven by increased nationalist sentiment. And I'll just leave that there. Okay. And then, last but not least, and where we'll be focusing a fair amount of time today, is trust in business. Half of countries are below 50% as it relates to trust in business. 16 of 27 saw a decrease year over year. But this decrease, as I mentioned before, is not really due to economic performance. You can see huge drops in markets that actually economies fared quite well. So why is that? Well, we looked at 4 key factors as it relates to trust in business. We looked at enterprise, industry, country of origin, and leadership. And here's a couple of our findings. Here you see the over years the amount of trust in CEOs, and as you can see, it's had a tremendous downturn over the years. In developed countries, only 1 in 3 believe that CEOs have credibility. Why is that? Is it a compensation issue? Is it a perceived focus over profit, on profit? Is it an issue of haves versus have-nots? Well, we also took a deeper dive, and perhaps related, is we looked at trust as in a variety of people who create content. Online sites such as social media and blogs. Now, interestingly enough, look at the top, friends and family, 72% are the most trusted, where CEOs are at 46%. Interestingly, companies I use have a 60% trust factor, while less than 1 in 3 believe in content from brands they do not use. So it's sort of, the more I know you, the more I trust you. But it is extremely important for companies to see the value of owned media channels and how they use those owned media channels and what kind of messages they deliver to their consumers. Only 53% believe journalists, which is actually not that much higher than CEOs. And as you can see, celebrities, interestingly enough, are toward the bottom. So again, and I talked about in leadership, it is a bit of a sad story for CEOs with the decline from the already low credibility they had last year. We sort of thought they had hit bottom last year. Now, for everyone, for Paul and everyone else who represent Yale here in the room, this is really good news. Academic or industry expert is the most trusted at 70%. And a person like yourself is 63%. Now, while NGOs went down as an institution, you remember we talked about that a few slides ago, you can see here an NGO representative is up by 2 points in credibility over last year. So what does it take to build trust? Well, we found that there are 16 attributes, trust-building attributes, which we've put into these 5 clusters. I'm not going to read all 16, but I will call a couple out. So first, engagement and integrity are the most important and the most critical in how businesses and companies advance innovations in the marketplace. So take a look. Integrity. They have ethical business practices, takes responsible actions to address an issue or crisis, has transparent or open business practices. Look under engagement. Listens to customer needs and feedback, treats employees well, places customers ahead of profits. And you can go on and you see products and services and purpose, which I know is a big element of what we're talking about today. Purpose is also important, works to protect and improve the environment, addresses society's needs in everyday business, creates programs that positively impact local community. Now, this is the first time we've asked this question, and it's quite significant. 8 in 10 believe business can make a profit and have positive impact. And I see someone taking a picture of that slide, and you should, because it's a significant finding. You can send it to me after if you want. Thank you. For the first time this year, we asked, what drives the increase or decrease of trust in business? Nearly 1 in 2 highlight that the contribution of the greater good is a reason for an increased level of trust in business, as you can see right there. But the lack of the contribution is also the main, 53%, the main reason for less trust in business. That's a significant finding. So why does trust matter? Well, trust matters because of what people will do when they trust you and what people will do when they don't trust you. So when people trust you, they will buy products and services. They will recommend them to a friend or colleague. They'll pay more. They'll share positive opinions online. They'll defend the company, and they'll buy shares in the company. All really important reasons to have trust. But even perhaps more importantly, what will people do when they don't trust you? 63% will refuse to buy your products or services. 58% will criticize them to a friend or colleague. They'll share negative opinions online, and they'll sell their shares. Now, this is particularly true and important when you consider what's in those 2 bubbles. 1, that the most trusted content creators are friends and family, having a big impact on these findings. 2, that the most trusted media source is online search engines. This is why trust matters. So we did talk about how companies build trust, and we've shed a bit of light on what it takes to build trust. And what we've seen is that respondents have decisively indicated that business shoulders a responsibility to deliver both business and economic and societal benefits. Companies that clearly delineate the personal and societal benefits prove that they are better positioned to build public trust. So the opportunity is really clear. Brands and companies that can build both, that can communicate to all their shareholders, can build both their positive and social impact on business. Consumers today really don't just want a better product or a better service. They want a better world. Happy Earth Day.
Okay, thanks so much, Gail. So as you all saw, the data from the Edelman Trust Barometer is really highlighting a problem for leaders and institutions of all sectors who rely on the trust of their stakeholders to achieve their missions and goals. But you've also started to give us some frameworks and tools that companies can use to start rebuilding trust. And now our panelists are going to help us dive deeper into why this is so important and how to go about implementing programs to address this decreasing trust in institutions. And given that today is Earth Day, we're really going to focus on the sustainability aspects of this. Today is a day where companies are really trying to put their best foot forward in terms of their sustainability efforts, releasing their reports and starting new initiatives. And all of that is really in service of this goal of building trust. And our panelists represent the gamut of types of organizations that are going to need to be involved in rebuilding trust and building transparency around sustainability so we can have stronger and more impactful institutions. And so with that, Carol, as a world-renowned leader in cause marketing and developing purpose initiatives for large corporations, can you start by clarifying for us the link between corporate trust and sustainability?
Great. Thank you, Marissa, and thank you, Yale and Paul and colleagues for having us all here today. I would just like to say what Gail, the bridge that she presented as she was finishing up her presentation, it's no longer if companies are going to get involved in social issues and environmental issues on a strategic basis. It's now about the how. And that's why I left my own firm after 30 years and I came to Edelman because of their vast resources and reach around the globe. And you take the Trust Barometer from 15 years, you take our brand share research, which I also suggest that you look at, and in our brand share, 92% of informed, and I don't call them consumers anymore, I call them citizens, because we all have in our hand, no matter whether you're in China or India or here, a device where we can act and we can talk and we can really incite all sorts of things to happen. And so I call them citizen consumers. And companies are realizing, as we saw in, I think the money chart up there was the trusted and the distrusters and how individuals are going to act. And so when you look at the 5 areas, the 5 attribute clusters that Edelman has determined over the years in our Trust Barometer, those are the actions and the behaviors that companies and brands need to take. And so let me unpack them a little bit for you so I can give you real examples of companies and organizations. And I have to say, sitting next to Patagonia, one of the best companies in the world that fulfills all those attributes is right here. And so I'm sure you're going to hear from them. So they're amazing. They're absolutely amazing. So just briefly, on the integrity scale, being transparent in ethical business practices, I always like to point to Chipotle. And Chipotle has grown their business through food with integrity. That is their mission at the center of their business. Now, it's not only having humane practices in terms of how they treat animals, but it's also how their farming practices are treated, as well as how they sustainably source ingredients. And so what did they do recently? This is a test to you. Somebody, what did they do that was very ethical and transparent? What did they do? Nobody knows.
Stop serving integrity.
There you go. Okay, they're carnitas. They're delicious, if you like pulled pork product. They found that one of their major suppliers was not treating the animals humanely. And so they took the very ethical and gutsy action to pull that product from 1/3 of their stores. And so what did Wall Street say? Yeah! They were very, very upset. But what did Steve Ellis get in terms of blogs and tweets and messages from his citizen customers? Keep it up, Steve. Be authentic and such. And they did not lose business. And their last quarterly results were great. Actually, today, I think they had their first $1 billion quarter, which is amazing. Okay, so that's integrity. Now, the next area is engagement. And so I'll give you another test. What company forgave, whatever, sorry, $2 billion of profits to put customers ahead of profits. Anybody? $2 billion. They changed what was carried in their stores. CVS. See, can you imagine being at the board meeting and somebody saying, hey, I think we should take tobacco products out of our stores? And you can imagine the board saying, well, we have to report to Wall Street. And that wasn't just one board meeting. That was years and years of discussions. But Larry Merlo said, we are evolving our company to be about health. And if we're in the health business, how can we sell products that kill people? And so they made the very gutsy decision, again, engagement, putting customers ahead of products. They pulled the products, and what happened? Their fourth quarter earnings, they were up 9.6%. Not in the front of the store, but in the back of the store where they're providing the minute clinics and various services. A gutsy decision, a CEO that stayed the course. There was a huge amount of discussion. We were very proud that we handled that announcement, as well as the Chipotle announcements. But again, a very gutsy leadership decision. Okay, the next one on innovation. Levi's, sorry to mention Levi's here, but that's okay, they're good friends. Levi's understood that to make one pair of jeans, it took 42 liters of water, and they're very social responsible, and they said, we cannot do that. We have to address it. And so through innovation and a lot of science and investigation, they now have something called waterless jeans and a waterless line, and it has 1 liter of water in the product. The next one is purpose. While purpose is one of the 5 clusters, what we're seeing is companies putting purpose at the center of their strategy. You have one of the foremost companies right here. I always like to mention Starbucks. And Starbucks, while you might say, well, they're in the race together, controversy, yeah, it's controversy, but Howard Schultz is a crusader. He's a crusader brand, and he puts his ethics and values at the center of that company. He gives stock to his part-time employees. Healthcare, he recently gave them free college tuition, and he's also helped to build local communities, and he's also stimulated discussion about race, putting purpose at the center of that company. The last one in terms of operations, and before we hand it over, is I like to say we're very proud at Edelman that we represent Unilever, and Unilever encompasses all of those attributes. But what they have done, and if you have not, who here has read the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan? Anybody? Good for you. That's great. If you go on their website and you look at the USLP, as we call it at Edelman, you will see it's the framework, exactly what Marissa said. It's the framework around which that company is organizing itself. And it's got 3 buckets. It's got improving the health and well-being of 1 billion people around the planet. It's about making sustainable agriculture in their products and services. It's doubling their growth, having their carbon footprint, and sustaining livelihoods. And so it's an amazing company. I really suggest that you all look at the Sustainable Living Plan. That's a company that lives and breathes its values. And as Paul Pullman says, that S in values really means a lot, that little small s.
Great. So yeah, there's lots of leaders in this space that are taking concrete actions to increase transparency around sustainability and push their initiatives forward. Of course, like you mentioned, we have one of the leaders of this in the room right here with Patagonia. And so, Vincent, from your perspective as a communications leader at Patagonia for much of your career, what do you see as the role of transparency in marketing for building trust, and how has Patagonia gone about doing it?
Is this
It's on.
live? Okay. I think that it's interesting when you describe these large companies, Unilever, Chipotle, large by our lights, because Patagonia is a medium-sized company. And if you try to think of what is Unilever's marketing image, like Nike has a clear definition. You think of the swoosh. Even Starbucks, you think of that little green, and you think of the cafe on every corner. But Unilever, what's their marketing? Chipotle, what's their marketing? What you think first about Chipotle is that video about how their food is made. What you first think first about Unilever as a corporation is about their sustainability effort, because everything else that you imagine Unilever is built into the brands. So one of the tasks for the accidents of Patagonia was that we came out of making climbing equipment. We came out of, we had the 70% market share, international market share for climbing equipment, and we had $300,000 in sales. So what we were doing was we were selling to friends, we were selling to friends of friends and friends of friends of friends, and that was 3 degrees of separation was the most we had. So I think that the other thing that was critical was that we had to make, we had to concentrate on quality. You do not make good, better, best climbing equipment and put the entry-level climber in danger by making your most mediocre product. We had those two things. We had quality, the insistence and the need for that in order to stay in business. And then we also had the sense that we were selling to friends and we were talking to friends as equals. And I think that has never left the company. So our primary job in communication is to treat our customers as friends and to keep that messaging, I even hate using that word, to keep what we say to our customers as intimate and as credible as possible. Now, in some ways, this has kind of slowed the growth of the company over years because we have never resorted to the kind of mass communication that might attract large numbers of people to our brand over a very short period of time. But also, our sense has been that if we attract large numbers of people to our brand over a short period of time, that we're not going to hold on to them, and that that's not good business for us. Good business for us is to hold on to customers for life. So I don't want to dominate the time, but one thought I've had on marketing recently is that it seems to me that more companies, if you're dealing with the issue of transparency, you're dealing with the issue of social and environmental purpose, because that is part of business now, is to deal with those questions, then every company should have an identity that's actually true to itself. And what I see is, especially with a lot of people who are starting up businesses, is they don't want to look like themselves. They want to look like their competitor. They want to look like the major player in the field. They're afraid to put themselves forward. I think that every company, like every individual, has a personality, has a kind of DNA that also is related to its mission. So for Patagonia, the fact that our identity is so closely tied to who we are as a group of people and also to our mission, I think has also provided, that's marketing, but that's also provided us a discipline in our activities. We have something to live up to that is very close to who we are, and we have a lot of personal engagement within the company from our employees, from our owners, and from our managers.
So I think we all really appreciate the sincere, mission-driven messaging that we hear from Patagonia, and that intimacy with which you communicate it. And there's so much good to share about the Patagonia story, but has there ever been a time that you had to make a difficult decision about communicating something a little bit less positive, and how did that go, and what was the effect?
Oh, yeah, we've had a number of great blunders. And I think for the fact that we did talk to people intimately helped us survive those incidents. This is a 30-year-old story, but it's so total. We decided to switch all of our buttons on our shirts, pants, and shorts to tagua nuts imported from the rainforest without doing the research to determine that those nuts would dry up in the dryer and fall off. So we had to replace every button on every shirt, pair of pants, and shorts that we made that fall. And that, of course, was costly, but that also, the fact that we did make good on that, engendered trust.
Great, thanks for that. Now, moving on to Jonathan from the IPCC, How does declining trust affect your institution's ability to achieve its missions and goals, and what is the IPCC trying to do to tackle it?
Well, thank you, Marissa. Actually, I think we're perhaps in unusual company in that our impression is that the trust in the IPCC has been increasing recently, but that's probably only because we were in such a very bad way about 5 years ago, where trust was at an all-time low. And my understanding of that is that people who had a problem with the climate science but had a difficulty in challenging the science went after the scientists, the reputation of the scientists who are producing that, and the institutions that were involved in that. So again, we're also in unusual company in that we have a dedicated community out there that's trying to undermine trust in us, and particularly the case in this country, but to a lesser extent in all the English-speaking countries. So that's something we have to deal with. And I mean, whatever the cause of it, the fact is that a few years ago we were seen as either arrogant or incompetent or both. And we really had to sort of start from the bottom and rebuild that. And I mean, the things that we did wouldn't really come as a great surprise to anyone in the room. They're just the sort of basics. So, I mean, one of the things we were perceived as being was being utterly unresponsive. If there was a problem, we didn't talk to people about it. So we put in place a process where if something out there looked negative, we were able to respond to it very quickly, and at the very least tell people we were looking into it and would come up with the information quickly. We also worked very hard with media to show that we were a resource for media, that media could come to us with questions, and where we couldn't answer them ourselves, we could find people who could, to brief them on not only on the substance of the science, but on the processes that led to our reports being produced. And certainly with media, even if not in some political areas, but certainly with media, we now have quite good relations. But there's really an awful lot still to do, and that really comes down to, I would say, access. So we're still seen as using language which is very inaccessible and even incomprehensible to the general public, as well as a wide range of the stakeholders that we should be reaching, and we have a lot to do there. And also access in terms of, can people have access to the documents that we're working on before they're finalized? Can people have access to our meetings? And more broadly, can we open ourselves up through social media? How can we do that? And we've been doing a bit of work with the Yale on just that, to see how we can just be seen and be more accessible to the public, to the citizens that you talked about. Thank you.
Great. And earlier, Gail mentioned that trust in CEOs as messengers are going down, but peer-to-peer, people just like me, messengers, are the most trusted kind of communicators. Have you also found kind of patterns in who are the most trustworthy communicators of science?
Well, scientists, on the whole, I mean, apart with the exception of those dedicated attempts to undermine them, on the whole, scientists have a very high level of trust, and people will listen to them. And I think that's why we saw several years ago this attempt to undermine them. People will listen to them, but the problem there is that they're not necessarily good communicators. Some are very gifted communicators, but some need a lot of help to get them there. And what we tend to rely on is, because we're certainly not a campaigning organization, we're not into advocacy, so we have to be very careful not to be seen to be over-promoting the message. We also have to be very careful not to exaggerate the message one way or another. And so sometimes what comes out seems to be rather austere or even boring and as I say, generally inaccessible. So we rely very heavily on other people around us who can pick up that message and, if you like, translate it into terms that will work for business or for youth or whatever. And we can informally work with them to do that and produce materials or communication that we can't actually do ourselves under our own name.
Okay, moving on to Jason and the Environmental Performance Index here at Yale. the EPI ranks how well countries perform on protecting ecosystems and protecting human health from environmental harm. So would you just tell us a little bit more about how the opportunities that you see for the kind of data that the EPI cultivates for sustainability, for improving corporate sustainability specifically?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. Well, we have a pretty broad coverage of countries, about 178 countries, and we utilize, we have also a fairly large team of researchers, and we utilize the best data and science out there, at least that we can find, to report on both the general context of country performance on environmental issues, but also on about 20 different sort of sub-areas of environmental performance. And so I think businesses might have an opportunity in spending time with the materials that we produce to get an idea for both that kind of general performance environment, policy environment, but also specific issues that might be relevant to their businesses should they want to have some sense, say, of water resources in the country they're working in or burden of environmental disease. I think also we make an effort, sort of similar to what Jonathan was saying, we make an effort to really speak to the stories behind the data and metrics. Not that we downplay the metrics, not that we downplay the data, obviously that stuff drives what we do, but we also recognize that, excuse me, there's a lot going on that data can't capture. And so we produce a lot of materials, both within our report and also for the general media that tries to get at that context, tries to get at, impacts and drivers of environmental challenges, but also long-term trends to sort of give a sense for what's happened in the past and what might be happening in the future. And so I guess that kind of dovetails into one of the main points that I thought Gail's presentation made, which is that if there's any real primary benefit from the EPI for businesses, it's getting a sense for the context of the environment and environmental performance in the countries in which they operate, to figure out not only a kind of future course of practices, but also some sense of kind of public-facing communications and sort of idea of what kind of policies they should be adopting as a company, particularly in the countries where they operate.
And what about, is there any role for businesses in terms of sharing their own data with the EPI?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's actually one that we've been really trying to, it's a nut that we've been really trying to crack. I think that there's quite a bit of, I would imagine, I'm not an expert on this kind of thing, but I would imagine there's quite a bit of benefit for companies to sort of boost their profile as companies that are looking to pursue sustainability by contributing data that might actually be fairly sensitive, totally understandably, to fill gaps in data that really stymie work like the work that the Environmental Performance Index does and other partner indexes. The Ocean Health Index and the Climate Change Performance Index are two that come to mind immediately. But I mean, consistently when we meet with our collaborators out there in the kind of academic environmental performance space, we're stymied by gaps because there's only so much that international agencies and individual academics working in universities can do. And some of that proprietary data would really go a long way to filling those gaps.
So there's an opportunity for businesses to benefit from using data on sustainability and metrics that the API provides, but also for them to contribute to greater sustainability goals.
100%, actually. Yeah, that's a great point.
Great. So with that, now that we've heard at least a little bit from each of our panelists, we'd like to open it up to you all for questions. Any questions that you might have about how to improve transparency and trust through sustainability? Nikki.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My question is primarily, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but the woman in glasses.
Carol.
Carol, who you were talking a lot about CVS and their decision not to carry tobacco products anymore. One of the largest health epidemics that our country is ever going to face is obesity and diabetes and related complications from that, and I can't help but notice that every single time I walk into CVS, the front of the store is full of candy and soda and all of that, and so I just, I agree with your comments on the tobacco, but then I immediately go to, well, what about some of the other stuff? And it still feels pretty hypocritical. And I'm wondering if what sort of factor that has, or if I'm thinking too much, and most of the feedback comes from people that don't have those secondary, but will wait, what about this kind of stuff? Or just kind of if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sure. I mean, that's a very good question, and the media has asked that question about CVS. I believe that they have looked at, they want to be in the health business, and they're going to have more and more, they have promotions for their employees, as well as they work with NGOs. For example, American Lung is one of their partners, and that they will promote health lifestyles in a variety of ways. I also think there's always the balance that you also have to run a business. And so they carry those items to help, you have to make a profit to be able to help society. So I'm not privy to that question in terms of whether they will ultimately get rid of those foods, but my sense is that knowing their values and knowing where they're moving as a business, they're certainly looking at that, but they want to promote healthy lifestyles. And so it's an important question to ask, and I have looked at my crystal ball, but I don't know if they're going to take those products out of their stores. You're welcome. Good question.
I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Oh, and I'm sorry, can you put on the microphones when you ask your questions? Thanks.
So about the Edelman Trust Barometer, I was really struck that 63% of people who don't trust companies don't buy from them. And I'm wondering what is in between the trust and distrust, and how much does it take for people to have an opinion of a company and then to, you told us what it takes for them to act on that opinion, but how much information do they need to even form an opinion to begin with?
Well, it's a good question. The term trust is an interesting one because it's basically how the individual interprets that word. We don't provide them with a definition. So however much information they have is what they're using to base that decision on. I can tell you that, we live in a world where consumers/citizens are facing about 5,000 messages per day. So whatever you are delivering from your company, it may get through or it may not. So it's important that, to the core of what everyone was talking about here, that the citizenship of the company be a large part of that platform that they're delivering, that message that they're delivering to their customers.
And if I can just underscore, I think that companies have come late to the party, to Gail's point, that employees are at the center of their organizations. And whether they have 10 employees, they have 10,000 employees, they have 600,000 employees, that thank God, my point of view, is that there's been this shift that those are the most important constituents, and that employees must be asked what companies should be involved in. They're given time off to be engaged in things. They're involved in innovation, and that they hear the information and the news first before an external constituency.
It's been an important shift in the communications industry, is the amount of time, resources, energy, priority that is put on employees. Because when you live in a world where search engines are the #1 trusted source of media, and you live in a world where someone just like me is the most credible source, your employees are your #1 ambassadors, for better or for worse. So most companies today are really taking that at heart and are communicating with their employees first.
And there's a kind of a conundrum at the retail level or at the transactional level, because a lot of companies have instituted systems that override the decision-making powers of the people on the floor. And that engenders mistrust. So if I go into a store and someone says, "Oh, I'm sorry, the computer won't let me do that, won't let me make this right for you," I'm not going to go back to that place unless I really have to. On the other hand, if somebody says, "Oh, absolutely, we will take care of this, no problem. That's a customer who's going to come back.
Thank you so much. So 2 questions. The first one is, how well do the trust trends actually reflect on sound business practices? I don't know if you've actually looked at that. Like, is the public actually getting it right? And then maybe a little bit more kind of to the first point, if you could talk a little bit about kind of the tension between attracting, I guess, people to consume more of a brand through sustainability initiatives, and the greater sustainability goal to consume less.
You guys tag team.
Do the ad. Don't buy this jacket.
That's a great
No, we actually ran into that at Patagonia, and I think one of the things that we wanted to communicate, we did the "Don't Buy This Jacket" ad precisely because we came across this problem. How do we talk to our customers about reduce as the first element in the 4 R's? And that's the most significant. You know, recycling really comes last. You should not be recycling something that shouldn't have been made in the first place. So it's a difficult conversation to engage with in the consumers, and we've kind of carried it to the next step with a worn-wear campaign in which we're celebrating clothes that have been worn for a long time, and invite our customers to come back, and we have a truck there and a sewing machine, and they can get it repaired, to change the perception of customers about goods that are meant to last, so that people see the value in something that they've had for a long time. As a business model, this doesn't really threaten us because, first of all, nobody else is doing it, so it creates differentiation among those 5,000 messages that everybody's getting in the daytime. It builds loyalty from the customers we have, and it also encourages the right kind of customer the right kind of new customer to come to us. That's on our level, as a company speaking to people. At another level, if you're studying, you can talk about a steady state economy as a goal, because we have attached, we cannot go on increasing material consumption, tying that to economic growth ad infinitum. But I think even in a steady state economy, you're talking about some companies falling and some companies rising. And the companies who are rising, according to what we're talking about, might be the companies that are doing the right thing. So I think it has to be addressed 2 ways. I can't, as a representative of Patagonia, tell customers, buy less from somebody else and more from us. I can only say, buy what you need or buy the right thing.
To the first question about if the public is getting it right, I was wondering, Jason, if you had a chance to see if there were any correlations between the countries that were either trusting or less trusting in Edelman's data and the EPI, and how transparent those countries might be.
Was it possible to pull up that slide again?
Yes, you probably could.
I think while you're looking for that slide, one thing that is probably important to mention is that the EPI doesn't really chart transparency at the national level. I mean, I wish we did, and there are, I think Transparency International comes to mind as one who does, but I wish that I could say for sure that there were some correlation looking at the EPI between transparency and environmental performance, and to some extent there is, but it's certainly not a general trend. Looking at those numbers, to some extent I'd say there is a correlation, but just as many countries, for instance, just looking at trusting countries in 2014 and 2015, you see some countries, the UAE and Singapore in particular, and of course the Netherlands, who tend to perform very well across indicators. But then you have countries that have long histories of both in environmental degradation and sort of sketchy histories of transparency that are up there in the truster category. And I think that, trust, as we've seen, I think one of you mentioned a lot of the trust increases in trust of leadership that we've seen have been in countries with new leadership or with leadership that is trustable, within their borders, but maybe a little bit sketchier outside. I think of India is up there. So it's, I would say that it's hard to say. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of sketchy.
I was just wondering if there could be any.
There could be.
Clean.
Yeah.
Just offer something briefly on this. On the positive, I don't know whether the customers are getting it right. On the negative, I think one of the things that happens with negative publicity in either the media or the social media is that the effect outlasts the actions by a long shot. So, Nike got in trouble in the mid-'90s for its labor practices and for its environmental practices, and it is actually a leader, certainly environmentally now. And I don't think that's widely perceived by the public. So if you get in trouble, whether mistrust is fair or not, once you're mistrusted, it's hard to get it back.
Any other questions? Yes, Lance?
I have two. Anyone can take them. If companies are spending much more time acting on and actually promoting their social responsibility, why is trust in business going down? Is there some sort of disconnect there? And then the second question is sort of along the same lines. If academics are so trusted, why is there so much mistrust in science in this country?
Well, I'll take the first one and then pass along the second. So I think it's a couple things. I think, there are obviously a significant portion of companies who are doing it right. And Carol gave a good examples, prime examples from across different industries. But it's still just ultimately, it's still just a small percentage. There are still a lot of companies that have a lot to learn. There are also a fair amount of companies, and we know this from our business, there are a lot of companies who, quite frankly, are just not very authentic about the message that they want to deliver. What you say is important. How you say it is more important. I think the example that Carol gave about Howard Schultz and Starbucks is a prime example. If he would have come out without the context of having done all of those other things, that it was quite authentic for him to be engaged and involved in the Race Together campaign. Now, people may have agreed with it, may have not agreed with it, but the authenticity in his intention was quite valid. There are many companies today who see the benefit, who know that, being a good corporate citizen is beneficial to selling products, but quite frankly, they don't have the there to do it. And so as a result, in today's world, and maybe this answers a little bit to your question as well, if you're not authentic, if you don't have the proof to back you up, you'll get caught on it. And that's where we see a lot of distrust emanate.
Yeah, maybe Jonathan, could you tackle the part about scientists?
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk specifically about this country, but I think there has been I'll try. There's clearly been an attempt to make scientists look untrustworthy. They're only doing it for the money, for the research grants. As the argument you see again and again. But I think for most people, I think the credibility of scientists and academics is pretty, up there just behind doctors. It was probably the most trusted group of all. But it also comes back to even scientists whose credibility hasn't been called into question, if they talk in a way that the public can't understand, if they use language that goes over people's heads, that actually undermines trust a little, because people think they're being arrogant or elitist or whatever, not really engaging with them. And sometimes the language can be positively misleading to a general public. I mean, the whole way in which scientists and doctors or health professionals and as part of the science community would talk about uncertainty can be very, very misleading. In the scientific community, it's one thing to say, we're 95% certain that this is happening. Many journalists would immediately respond, so you don't know then? You don't know for sure? This isn't safe then? And so a lot of work needs to be done in how do you communicate that whole question of uncertainty. That's one example. Also, the way that some words are used differently in the scientific community and in the general public. I mean, in my area of climate, people talk about aerosols, meaning little sort of particles, but most people think that's something you squirt on you to make you smell nice, and it's instantly misleading. So.
I also think that just the use of visuals, videos, infographics. I mean, I'm sure it's just scientists said, "Oh my God, I've been reduced to an infographic." But the way that we can remember things, or the story of the patient that was involved in an innovative prosthesis or something like that. So I think it's really up to the communicators to partner with the genius scientists and the experts and to really battle. I mean, it is going to be a give and a take in terms of which audience, which communication, but again, simplification because of those 5,000 plus messages just constantly coming at us. It's absolutely critical.
If I can just add to that, I mean, you're right. And the problem that a lot of scientists have is that they're brought up and trained to be rigorous and sober and austere. And in fact, the messages that really strike home are the ones with some kind of emotional charge to them. And we're always trying to tell our scientists, try and bring a little bit of your personality into it. You don't have to get unscientific about this, but try and maybe explain how this relates to you. I don't think it's been to the United States yet, but there was a play on in London recently called 2071. It was a one-man show by a scientist called Chris Rapley, who used to be the director of the Science Museum in London, but he's also a noted climate scientist and expert on polar science. And when I went to see that, and it sounded like this is a lecture on climate science or the IPCC, and what am I buying a theatre ticket to hear this for? But every now and again, these little really moving personal bits came out, and you could understand this is why this is important. It's no longer something abstract, and I think that would apply equally to business as well.
Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. I think I can speak for the room full of business and environment students here that we've all learned a lot about the importance of transparency and building trust, and the importance in trust in establishing the organizations that we'll go off to work for as leaders. And I hope that we, on this Earth Day and for many Earth Days going forward, can remember some of the lessons that we talked about today. So thank you all very much.
Yes, thank you. Great. We'd like to have you guys all join us in wishing Gail Becker happy birthday. Here's our Candle Labs. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Gail. Happy birthday to you. The candles are Thank you. Yes, so join us eating cake outside. Thank you all, and thank you all. All right, bye-bye. Yeah.
Do you guys want to get a photo?
Yeah, let's get a photo. Okay, great. Yeah.
I want to get a picture. No one will believe it.
No.
Do it without taking one. Yeah. No, I know, not in here. I just meant. No. Okay.
Happy birthday. Great. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Happy birthday.